There comes a point in a man's life when he begins noticing something disturbing about himself, something subtle, almost invisible, yet undeniably present. He starts to realize that not all weaknesses reveal themselves as dramatic failures, emotional breakdowns, or obvious flaws. Some weaknesses hide in the quiet corners of his personality, in the tone of his voice, in the intentions behind his actions, in the small choices he makes when no one is watching. And even more unsettling is something deeper. The more intelligent a man becomes, the more skillfully these weaknesses disguise themselves as virtues. Confucius understood this long before modern psychology existed. He saw that the most dangerous flaws are never the loud ones. They are the quiet ones, the refined ones, the ones a man would rather cloak in wisdom than confront with honesty. And so, the master said, "The noble man looks within, the small man looks outward." Most never look within, not truly. They prefer external battles, external enemies, external problems. But the greatest conflicts a man faces are always internal ones, the ones he is afraid to name. And this brings us to something Confucianism teaches with almost painful clarity. The intelligent man is most tempted to conceal the weaknesses that contradict the image he has built of himself. He is sharp enough to hide them even from his own awareness, turning self-deception into a sophisticated art. He can analyze others with precision, but when it comes to his own inner faults, he becomes strangely blind. But why? Why would a man who possesses intelligence, insight, and awareness fear seeing his own weaknesses? The answer is simple, yet profound. Because an intelligent man builds his identity around the idea of competence. And anything that threatens the image of competence feels like an existential danger. Rather than confront the root, he polishes the facade. Confucius saw this pattern everywhere, in scholars, rulers, teachers, students, and ordinary people. He noticed how men, especially the clever ones, prefer to admit small, harmless flaws, like impatience or stubbornness, while burying the weaknesses that actually shape their destiny. Weaknesses tied to pride, to insecurity, to desire for reputation, to fear of not being enough. In Confucianism, genuine self-cultivation does not begin when a man improves himself. It begins when he stops lying to himself. And lying to oneself is easier than most people imagine. A man can convince himself he is disciplined when in truth he only avoids discomfort. He can believe he is wise when in truth he is merely cautious. He can claim he seeks harmony when in truth he avoids conflict. These illusions often feel like strengths, but Confucius warns, what you refuse to name grows in the dark. The three hidden weaknesses we will explore in this narrative are not the weaknesses men talk about. They are the ones men refuse to talk about, even in the silence of their own minds. These weaknesses quietly sabotage relationships, decisions, ambitions, morality, and inner peace. And without the Confucian discipline of self-examination, they eventually consume a man's character from within. Before we uncover them, we must understand the foundation. A man cannot overcome what he refuses to acknowledge, and the more intelligent he is, the more creative and convincing his self-deception becomes. One of the core teachings of Confucianism is that the downfall of a man rarely comes from forces outside of him. It comes from the cracks in his character, cracks so subtle that he learns to step around them rather than repair them. The first hidden weakness that an intelligent man almost never admits is the fear of inadequacy. Not incompetence, inadequacy. There's a difference. Incompetence is about lacking skills. Inadequacy is about lacking worth. And while people can openly acknowledge a lack of skill, very few will confess, especially the intelligent, that deep down they fear they are not enough. Confucius often hinted that this fear is the root of all distorted behaviors. He saw it in officials who pretended to be wise, in students who parroted knowledge without understanding, in men who guarded their reputations more fiercely than their conscience. When he said, "The superior man is modest in speech but exceeds in actions," he was pointing directly at this fear. Because when a man is driven by adequacy, he acts, not from principle, but from the restless need to prove himself. The intelligent man hides this fear behind achievement, behind eloquence, behind competence. He builds a fortress of identity, solid enough that no one can question him, polished enough that he can avoid questioning himself. But that is the tragedy. He who fears inadequacy the most is often the one who appears the most confident. Confucius understood this illusion well. He knew that beneath the brilliance of many scholars lay hearts trembling with insecurity. That is why he repeatedly emphasized ren, humaneness, not brilliance, yi, righteousness, not cleverness, li, proper conduct, not performance, because cleverness protects the ego, virtue examines it. This first hidden weakness shapes a man's entire life without his awareness. It dictates what goals he chooses, what relationships he forms, what risks he avoids, what compliments he clings to, what criticisms he resents. It especially reveals itself in moments of silence, when there is no one to impress, no one to outperform, no stage on which to perform competence. Confucius said, "The superior man stands in awe of three things: heaven's mandate, great men, and the words of sages. But the insecure man fears only one thing: being seen. Seen without pretense, seen without performance, seen without the persona he has built to feel safe." This fear affects how he speaks. He may pretend openness, but his words are guarded, shaped carefully to maintain a certain image. It affects how he listens. He listens not to understand, but to anticipate judgment. It affects how he learns. He reads not for wisdom, but for ammunition, to appear intelligent, to win arguments, to fortify his identity, and worst of all, it affects how he grows. A man who fears inadequacy cannot truly grow, because growth requires the humility to say, "I was wrong, I didn't know, I misunderstood." Confucius tells us that the root of wisdom is the willingness to name one's ignorance, but the intelligent man hiding inadequacy avoids this at all costs. Thus he becomes brilliant yet brittle, knowledgeable yet insecure, accomplished yet unsure. Until he confronts this first weakness, nothing else in his life stands on solid ground. For a tree cannot grow straight if the seed was planted in fear. The second hidden weakness an intelligent man never admits, and perhaps cannot even recognize, is the attachment to superiority. Not arrogance in the obvious sense, not loud pride, boastfulness, or flamboyant vanity. Those are visible weaknesses, easy to identify and easy to criticize. What Confucius was concerned with is far more subtle. The quiet conviction, deep inside a man's psyche, that he is above others, not morally, but intellectually, not in status, but in judgment, not in power, but in understanding. This is the weakness that hides inside refinement, culture, eloquence, and education, the one that disguises itself as discernment, the one that whispers, "I see more clearly than they do. I understand what they cannot. I am built differently." An intelligent man rarely sees this as a flaw. In fact, he often interprets it as a natural consequence of his intellect. But Confucius warned repeatedly that the mind becomes crooked long before the character does, and nothing bends the mind more quietly than the belief that one already knows. Confucius said, "Real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance," but the intelligent man, ironically, struggles the most with this. His intelligence becomes a shield, protecting him from self-doubt, insulating him from correction, convincing him that he is exempt from the lessons ordinary men must learn. He believes he is rational while others are emotional, clear while others are confused, objective while others are biased. But no one is as susceptible to subtle error as the man who believes he cannot be fooled. Superiority is the most invisible prison a man can build. It doesn't feel like confinement. It feels like clarity. It feels like empowerment. It feels like seeing from a higher vantage point. But Confucius understood. The moment a man thinks he has ascended above others, his fall has already begun. The superior man cultivates humility not because it is polite, but because it protects the mind from distortion. Pride, especially intellectual pride, is the fog that clouds discernment. The intelligent man refuses to admit this weakness because it contradicts the image he has built, an image of fairness, balance, wisdom. He cannot imagine that he, of all people, might be held hostage by his own intellect. Yet, this attachment reveals itself in subtle behaviors, dismissing advice too quickly, interrupting others internally even when silent, evaluating instead of empathizing, listening only to respond, not to understand. It reveals itself when he gives more weight to ideas that mirror his own, and quietly rejects those that challenge his worldview. Confucius said, "When you meet someone better than yourself, turn your thoughts to becoming equal. When you meet someone not as good, turn your gaze inward and examine your own heart." But the man attached to superiority never truly does either. He fails to learn from the wise because they threaten him, fails to learn from the flawed because he feels above them. Thus he learns slowly, painfully, unevenly. His intelligence becomes stagnant, a pool instead of a river. The greatest irony is this: superiority feels like elevation, but it prevents a man from rising. It keeps him trapped in the boundaries of what he already knows. It blocks humility, and without humility the Confucian path of self-cultivation collapses. A man cannot become great while secretly believing he already is. The third hidden weakness, and perhaps the most corrosive of all, is the reluctance to confront one's own moral inconsistency. This is the weakness Confucius warned about more than any other, because it silently eats away at a man's integrity while allowing him to maintain the appearance of righteousness. Unlike the fear of inadequacy or the attachment to superiority, this weakness is not rooted in emotion or intellect. It is rooted in the gap between what a man believes and what he practices. Confucius saw that even the wisest, most disciplined men often lived with a subtle fracture running through their character. A fracture formed when their ideals and their actions drifted apart, even slightly. This fracture rarely begins dramatically. It begins quietly at the edges of a man's decisions. A small justification here, a slight compromise there, a harmless bending of principle for convenience, comfort, or desire. The intelligent man is particularly vulnerable to this weakness because he has the tools to rationalize anything. He can explain his failures with eloquence. He can transform selfish choices into reasonable ones. He can wrap his indulgences in philosophical language. He can persuade himself that his exceptions are temporary, justified, necessary, even virtuous. And so he moves further from his own principles while believing he remains faithful to them. Confucius despised this form of self-deception above all. He believed the true measure of a man is not found in how he acts when he is watched, honored, or praised, but in the moral choices he makes in silence, when only heaven sees. The superior man, he said, is watchful over himself when alone. Because when a man is alone, the mask falls, the audience disappears, and what remains is the truth of his character. Yet this is precisely the moment the intelligent man avoids. He fears the stillness of solitude because it forces him to face the dissonance within him. He may preach patience, yet harbor resentment. He may value honesty, yet speak with subtle manipulation. He may present himself as disciplined while living undisciplined in secret. He may praise virtue, yet crave reputation more than righteousness. These contradictions accumulate slowly, like dust settling on a surface, imperceptible at first, eventually forming a layer thick enough to conceal the original shine. But here lies the Confucian insight. Moral inconsistency does not remain small. It grows, it spreads, it reorganizes the soul from the inside. Eventually, a man feels divided within himself, restless, uneasy, internally unaligned. His mind moves in one direction, his actions in another. His words claim one thing, his life demonstrates another. And because he cannot admit this fracture, not even to himself, he seeks distractions, achievements, relationships, philosophies, anything to avoid looking at the widening gap. Confucius taught that harmony begins not with the world, not with society, not even with the family, but with the self. To put the world in order, we must first put the nation in order, he said. To put the nation in order, we must first put the family in order. To put the family in order, we must first cultivate our personal life. And to cultivate our personal life, we must first set our hearts right. A man whose heart is divided cannot set anything else right. This is why the intelligent man's greatest danger is not failure, but the inability to see the truth about himself. And nothing blinds him more deeply than moral inconsistency disguised as virtue. There is something profoundly human and profoundly tragic about the way a man avoids looking directly at his own contradictions. Confucius understood this better than most. He saw that when a man becomes divided within himself, he begins to experience a subtle, persistent uneasiness. Not guilt, not shame, those are too explicit. What he feels is a quiet misalignment, a sense that something is off, that his life does not flow the way it should. He cannot name it, but he can feel it. And instead of addressing it, the intelligent man tries to outthink it. He becomes busier, more ambitious, more focused on external results, success, recognition, influence. Not because he is driven, but because he is avoiding something. He tries to outrun his own conscience by filling his days with movement, noise, and intellectual stimulation. Confucius warned repeatedly that if a man keeps himself busy without self-examination, his mistakes will multiply. Activity without introspection becomes a smokescreen, a way to escape the quiet voice inside that keeps asking, "Are you still the man you claim to be?" The true cost of these three hidden weaknesses, fear of inadequacy, attachment to superiority, and moral inconsistency, is not immediately visible. Their cost is cumulative. They distort a man's judgment, weaken his relationships, and fragment his inner life. Slowly, without noticing, he becomes a stranger to himself. And perhaps that is the greatest danger of all. The intelligent man is often the last person to realize that he has drifted away from the very values that once defined him. Confucius believed that the foundation of strength is not brilliance, but harmony, alignment between thought, action, and character. And when this alignment breaks, even subtly, a man begins to suffer the symptoms without understanding the cause. His patience shortens, his peace becomes fragile, his confidence becomes reactive instead of stable. He grows sensitive to criticism, suspicious of others' motives, easily irritated, easily offended. These are not personality flaws, they are warning signs of internal misalignment. In Confucianism, the remedy is not external achievement but rectifying the heart. The master taught that order in the world begins with clarity in the self, but clarity is painful for the intelligent man because he sees too much, and so he avoids seeing the one thing he must, his own hidden faults. Yet Confucius insisted that a man does not become great by avoiding truth. He becomes great by facing truth and correcting course. The path forward begins with a kind of courage rarely spoken about. The courage to sit in silence and observe oneself without escape or justification, to ask the uncomfortable questions. Why do I react the way I do? Why do I seek what I seek? Why do certain people irritate me? Why do certain truths offend me? Where am I inconsistent with what I claim to value? Confucius believed that self-examination is the highest form of intelligence because it transforms knowledge into wisdom. External intelligence looks outward, analyzing, categorizing, judging. But internal intelligence looks inward, observing, correcting, refining. And while the world rewards the first, heaven rewards the second. A man who confronts his hidden weaknesses becomes steady, integrated, reliable. He gains a presence that others trust, not because he appears strong, but because he is whole. This is the Confucian ideal of the Junzi, the superior man. Not someone perfect, but someone continually aligning himself with virtue. Until a man faces these three weaknesses, intelligence remains brittle. Once he faces them, intelligence becomes character. At the end of all this, Confucius would urge a man to ask himself a final uncomfortable question, one that few people dare to consider. What kind of person am I becoming when no one is watching? Because the truth is simple yet severe. A man's destiny is not shaped by what he knows, what he achieves, or what he displays to the world. It is shaped by the person he is in private, the person shaped by his hidden weaknesses or his willingness to confront them. If a man refuses to acknowledge his fear of inadequacy, life becomes a performance. Every accomplishment becomes a mask, every success a fragile defense, every failure a threat to the identity he desperately maintains. His intelligence becomes his enemy, constantly feeding him reasons to hide rather than reasons to grow. Confucius saw this and warned that to know what is right and not do it is the worst cowardice. The fear of inadequacy makes a man brilliant in thought, but weak in character. If a man refuses to confront his attachment to superiority, he becomes imprisoned by his own intellect. He stops learning, he stops listening, he stops evolving, he becomes rigid, defensive, quietly resentful. Confucius taught that the superior man is not the man who knows everything, but the man who is always willing to become better. But superiority kills this willingness. It traps a man in the illusion that he has nothing left to learn. And if a man refuses to see his moral inconsistencies, his soul becomes divided. He speaks one truth and lives another. He values principles, but protects comfort. He praises virtue, but practices convenience. Confucius warned that a man who lacks integrity cannot stand. He understood that internal fragmentation eventually destroys external stability. When a man is not aligned within, nothing outside him can function harmoniously. These three hidden weaknesses, left unexamined, create a life filled with subtle suffering. Not dramatic suffering, but the quiet, persistent kind. A feeling that life is somehow heavier than it should be. A sense that relationships do not flow. A restlessness that victory cannot soothe. A frustration that achievement cannot satisfy. This is the suffering of a man at war with himself. And yet, and this is where the wisdom of Confucius becomes truly profound, none of this is condemnation. It is invitation. Confucianism does not shame a man for his weaknesses. It calls him to refine them. It does not attack intelligence. It elevates it by grounding it in virtue. It does not expose flaws to humiliate. It exposes them to transform. The master believed that any man, no matter how flawed, could become a junzi, a superior man, if he committed himself to correcting what was within his power to correct. And what is always within a man's power is his character. A man cannot control the world. He cannot control outcomes. He cannot control the actions of others. But he can control the alignment of his own heart. The intelligent man becomes truly wise the moment he realizes that intelligence alone is not enough. That brilliance without humility becomes blindness. That achievement without virtue becomes emptiness. That self-confidence without self-examination becomes a trap. Confucius taught that greatness is not found in talent or fortune, but in character shaped deliberately, consistently, honestly. The real strength of a man lies not in hiding his hidden weaknesses, but in confronting them without flinching, in aligning his actions with his principles, in seeking truth where it is most difficult to look, within himself. And if he does this, something extraordinary happens. His intelligence stops serving his ego and begins serving his life. His judgments become clearer. His relationships become deeper. His decisions become steadier. And his presence becomes peaceful. Not because he is flawless, but because he is whole. This is the Confucian path. Not brilliance, not perfection. Alignment, harmony, integrity. A man who embraces these steps no longer needs to hide anything, because he has nothing left to fear within himself.